Wonderful. Make yourself comfortable in our home here at Thompson Hine. There's some liquid refreshment now. There'll be some better liquid refreshment afterwards, which we're hoping that you'll stay and be part of. Thompson Hine is really pleased that you've decided to come and participate in this convening, this conversation. We think it's going to be very, very interesting. Not only because you're here and this is all about you, but the guests that we have sitting in front of you are going to tell a significant story. I'm going to start with some of that story. But before I do, I'd like to introduce you to some of the team members from Thompson Hine that are part of the data center digital infrastructure team here at Thompson Hine. The head of our real estate group, Tom Coyne, who's sitting right here. And Tom has been a really important part of this convening. And then there's Tanya Nesbitt. Tanya Nesbitt sits in our Atlanta office. She's in the back. She's part of our data center practice as well, part of our construction practice group, which is what I'm part of, and our environmental practice. We have Sarah Sparrow, who's sitting right to her left. Sarah is part of our data center practice and also part of our construction practice group here in New York. The person that's not here is the thought leader who runs the think tank for the C-suite of the architectural and engineering community, at least in the United States. I'll do that one more time. Dave Gilmore, the president and CEO of DesignIntelligence, a friend of one of our conveners, Carolyn Golin, who I'll introduce you to in a moment, and Tanya Nesbitt, and her husband, Jay. Dave Gilmore runs a think tank called DesignIntelligence. He convenes groups around the world multiple times a year on thought-provoking subjects. DesignIntelligence was started about 40 years ago in La Jolla. So the La Jolla conference is very important. And if you're part of the Design Futures Council of DesignIntelligence and you see a fellow member and you say, are you going to be at La Jolla? And they're either up or down. Mostly they're always up because it's an interesting convening. And we're friends of Dave Gilmore. So when Tom and I were talking about doing something like we're doing today, we got Dave Gilmore on the phone, who shared his curiosity about what we're doing because he understands where we're going as an industry. Whether you're a bank, a design firm, a construction firm, a think tank, a real estate practice, a construction practice, an engineering firm, we're going to be here for about 90 minutes. You'll be eagerly wanting to ask the panel some questions. They're yours to ask, and we'll entertain them once we start the engine. We intend that this will be part of a continuing discussion, though, on this subject, programming that we'll do over the course of the near-term future, because Thompson Hine thinks that data centers are important to it and digital infrastructure as they are to you. So let's put some context around energy. There's not enough of it, or is there enough of it? Is it the grid that's the problem, or is there not enough capital? Well, we know there's enough capital. Or is it the regulators? We're going to unpack that today. So the goal of today is to elevate our perspectives because we're going to have a treasure trove of research that's resident with our friends. And I'm going to introduce you to our friends in a moment. And we're going to unpack the complex opportunities that are available. So you're not here to listen, you're here to take back from Thompson Hine and our guests new ideas and new relationships, not only with the people that are in front of us, but the people that are on the left and right of you. So today is all about you, not about Thompson Hine. You're not going to hear about where we're practicing, all of our offices, what we do, how we distinguish ourselves, because it's all about you. So let's talk about the people that are in front of us. I only met Kevin Sanders about 8 weeks ago, but I've known his company for many, many, many years. It was one of the members of Thompson Hine that introduced his company to data centers. Thank you. Einhorn, Yaffe, Prescott was a major league architectural engineering firm resident in Albany, New York, with some offices around different parts of the country. And Steve Einhorn was an icon that knew how to grow a practice well ahead of his time. I was meeting with a client in White Plains that was an architectural engineering firm doing work for the telephone company on a T&M basis. I had never seen that before. So I called Steve and I said, Steve, I don't care whether you buy this company or not. He never purchased a company before that. I only care that you meet these people because I think something's going on. He ended up buying a White Plains company, which became the granddaddy of data center design. And I don't think they used the word data centers back then, but he did that. And then he sold his company to Hewlett-Packard, at least the mission critical division, and the rest of his practice stayed and had their separate life. And then EYP Mission Critical sold to HP, and there's a story you can read about them. But now they're owned by a company called Ramboll, 20th largest engineering firm in the world, and they're in the data center business. So I've gotten to know Kevin, and because I got conflicted out last week, I said, after I started to speak with him, I want to go up to Boston. Actually, you're west of Boston, right? And have dinner with you. Can I do that? I wanted to drive 3 hours to have dinner with him. You will too, after you listen to some of the things he's saying. So he's the design. But you can't just take the design without having the money. Here's the money. So Brent Mayu, and he just had a new baby, he and his wife just a few months ago now. How old is the baby? 3 months. And I met Brent because he's part of our network in a firm called Newmark, the third largest publicly traded brokerage firm, real estate brokerage firm in the country. And he is running the data center division in the capital markets group. He's got the money. So when he called me about 2 months ago and needed an introduction, I said, well, let me introduce you to Carolyn Golin. Now, I'll tell you about Carolyn Golin because it's really interesting. She recently, about 4 months ago, left Google, but she was responsible for the decarbonization of Google around the world. Around the world, Dr. Carolyn Golin, which she doesn't use a lot. Mother of 4 children, person with significant value, and you're going to be really interested in hearing what she has to say. But what's really interesting is when she announced that she was leaving and Google wouldn't let that happen, the world started to call her. And I can't tell you more than that, but the world started to call her. The people that have the money, have the design, have the land, have some of the biggest aspirations, but where do you get the energy from? I don't know if this is true, but I believe that I can ask Caroline to introduce me to any energy company at the executive ranks in the country. And I bet you she could do that for me. So we put together some provocative questions that are on a piece of paper that's in front of you to start to spur the thinking. And we've given it to the people that will be speaking with us. But before I turn to that, why don't you each tell us a little bit about yourselves, better than what I just did. And why don't we start with you, Carol?
I can read. Good afternoon, everyone. So Caroline Golin. I did recently leave Google. My formal title there was Global Head of Market Development and Innovation, which essentially meant I was responsible for figuring out how we were going to go to market, how we were going to strike partnerships with local stakeholders, whether that be utilities, developers, regulators, governors, prime ministers, the like, and how we were going to build new carbon-free energy to decarbonize our operations. When I started at Google, there were 6 people on the team. This was about 8 years ago, and no one in Google cared at all about energy or our team or what we did or that we had this really ambitious decarbonization goal. We were a nice thing to put in an environmental report, to be honest. And then about 3 years ago, well, everyone knows what started happening about 3 years ago, and all of a sudden, energy at hyperscaler companies was about the most valuable asset that no one understood, right? And so you are sitting in a company where it is not an energy company. In fact, we can talk about this. It's not even an infrastructure company, really. And you're responsible for telling them how they get the thing that they can't get, right? And they don't know how to get, but they desperately know that they need. And they need it faster, and they need it cheaper, and they need it cleaner than anything in the market can provide. And so you learn a lot, right? And I think the last 8 years has been about being at the front of the wave of an economic transition, and trying to survive that wave, trying to not drown amongst the chaos, and learn some discernment along the way. And so now I've been able to sort of pop out and say, okay, this is truth, this is hype, and also this is just where we're failing as an industry and in general. And hopefully we'll get to talk about some of that today.
Let's turn to Brent. Brent, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, everyone, for the time. I'm Brent Mayo. I lead the data center and digital infrastructure practice at Newmark, as Jamie mentioned. So the way to think about us is we are very industry focused. We cover everything from structuring powered land deals, which has obviously been a major piece of where the environment is today, capital raising, both debt and equity, leasing, and then more advisory. So we cover everything within data centers. We've had the opportunity to be part of some of the marquee recent transactions, the Stargate transactions, the recent Fermi IPO, and kind of everything in between that falls in data centers. So, excuse me. I spent, prior to the 2 years at Newmark, I spent 8 years on the investment banking side doing M&A deals, specifically in the data center space, and was on the operator side running strategy and development before that. So have about 14, 15 years in this space and have seen quite the evolution.
That's an understatement. How many dollars have you placed at Newmark in the last couple of years?
We've done about 35 billion in the last 2 years at this point. So it's.
And where does that rank with your competitors?
That's a great question. It feels like a leading question, but I'd say it's near the top of the league tables right now. So, yeah.
Kevin, tell us about yourself and what you've been doing for the last few years.
You've done such a good job. I don't think
Well,
I have
I'm sure there's more.
to. So, as you could tell, I have a few years on me, and the data center business for me started way back when, under what we used to refer to as high performance computing. I was a math nerd and an engineer, and we were into scientific computing and mathematics. And when I joined EYP at Hewlett Packard, I took over the strategy and consulting group because we had. My group, internal to HP and then HPE, had been building data centers for, good Lord, 20 some odd years, both private for major enterprises, for governments, secure government facilities, and colleges and universities globally. So we had a very, very strong background. EYP brought this huge number of highly trained engineers specific to data center, which was really wonderful. And when we linked up with Ramboll, because Ramboll wanted to get into the data center business, one of Ramboll's strategies is the whole point about resiliency and renewability in the world. And we have been working with them for a couple of years, and they said, why don't you just come and join us? So I managed what is referred to as the strategy consulting group, but it's a mixed group of folks that are engineers who do hardcore preliminary design for data centers, and then bring in the other engineers we have as you go up the design stack, financial experts who understand, cost. We began to pioneer many, many years ago technology choices based on OPEX and CAPEX flows for companies so they understand what they're getting into and what the impacts would be long-term with adopting new technologies. That's when people were building data centers. In the last 2.5 to 3 years, it's been this Nantucket sleigh ride with the equity side of the business. We have formed relationships with large and small equity providers to folks who are looking to acquire data centers. We have been responsible for doing the engineering analysis and market and operation analysis. We're proud to say for now over $80 billion worth of successfully executed transactions globally. So we think that we're probably one of the largest folks in that player and in that game, and most of the large equity providers, both family-owned all the way up to public, turn to us for making those kinds of judgment calls. And so basically it's a catbird seat watching what's happening in the world, not just from an engineering standpoint, but the impact of AI and then the effects on engineering, and watching enormous amounts of money chasing enormous amounts of infrastructure. And so it's there's a book in there somewhere for me, but it's been a lot of fun.
How many people do you have in your group in Ramble in UIP Mission Critical?
In my group,
Well, I meant the whole UIP Mission Critical.
Now it's about 800 and change globally. We're on all 3 continents. And then, of course, we draw down on the engineering groups from Ramble, which is 14,000, of which 6,000 are engineers.
So let's ask the critical question. And if it's answered in the negative, we all can go home and have the rest of the day. Are we in a bubble? Are we in a bubble? Is this going to happen to us too? Would you like to start, Caroline?
Sure. Are we in a bubble? Sure. We're in a bubble or we're not in a bubble. I'm not positive it matters so much, right?
Why is that?
Well, we're at the beginning of a massive economic transformation, and one that I think is far more disruptive than any of the ones we've seen over the past 50 to 100 years. And so, of course, there's a bubble aspect to it, but that just means we're weeding out the winners and losers in any sort of economic transformation. I am not affluent on what is the right AI technology to invest in. I'm, unfortunately quite the Luddite, and much to my children's chagrin. What I am, quite skilled at is seeing where we are on the energy system. And I think my argument would be, it doesn't really matter if we're in a bubble, if we're in an infrastructure bubble, because data centers are only about 30 to 40% of energy demand currently, and they will not go above 30, 40% energy demand over the next 20 years. We're going to see the electrification of residential transport and the electrification really of industrial processing. If you look at it globally, air conditioning is still going to be the largest driver of energy use over the next 30, 40 years, because we have continents that still don't have air conditions. But so the question is not, are we in a bubble, but it's what do you do with the capital that swirls with the bubble in order to make sure that that's useful long term, right? And so on the energy side, I would say it doesn't really matter if you do it and invest well, and you're thinking, investors are thinking about how do we avoid overbuild, which I think is a real risk. However, I feel that slowdown in workforce, and I'd be interested in what you think, slowdown in workforce materials in general is going to constrict some of the market. But it matters more if we think through, where do we need energy over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And what do we actually need right now to work out the winners and losers of AI technology? And what we actually need right now is megawatt hours, and be real technical for a second. We need peak load reduction megawatt hours, right? That's actually what we need on the system. There are certain places around the country and around the world that need to build new power plants. But for most areas, we actually need to do is just find megawatt hours in the system. This country in particular is incredibly overbuilt. The distribution system is the main reason why prices have been going up, despite what every news article you see out there, that data centers are driving all the costs up. We're driving some of the costs up, but the vast majority of the cost has been driven up over the past 7 years is because we poorly invested in the distribution system, and now all that is coming to roost, right? We don't have a very resilient grid. We don't have an interoperable grid. We don't have a flexible grid. We don't have a way to pull megawatt hours off the distribution system and repurpose. When I say repurpose, that is not a technical term, wheel them to the transmission system. We just have a very leaky house, like an incredibly leaky house, and we're looking at building additions before we fix the house, right? There are certain parts of the country where we're going to need to build new power plants, but if you do that well with planning for where load growth is coming down the pike, I think that all the energy investments will be used and useful. I think that the concept of a bubble is really, is every AI company gonna make it? No, but that's actually how transformations happen. That's how we evolve. The bigger issue is, will the infrastructure that we invest in to power those companies, said companies, are they going to be used and useful in the long run? I can talk about the energy side. You can talk about the shells. But from the energy side, I'm much more optimistic if we do it well. I'm not saying we're doing it well right now. We can talk about that later. But if we do it well, I don't think it matters if we're in a bubble or not. No.
What's your view on that, Ben?
History of the world says that every time you get a sort of a global change in how we're put together, you have this sine wave up and down till it straightens itself out. And for me, a bubble is really, and I don't mean to be coy about it, a learning curve. We're doing a whole bunch of things very, very rapidly, and then we pull back and go, yikes, we did a few of these things wrong, and then we move on. And, for those of you who remember, the bubbles of the internet, we got one, it's bigger, and it's, better than it was, and the world didn't come to an end. Mortgage-backed securities, not going to talk about that, but we all still have houses and mortgages are being granted, usually. The issue is the level of complexity in designing and building. I'm going to riff off of Carolyn's point, these large AI data centers, which, as Sam Altman's referred to as the next manufacturing, wave of the world, and the stresses that it's putting on the grid because it's such a concentrated amount of power required in one place. That's one of the choke points. And so we're going to get to a point where this sort of rapid growth, even though there's a lot of money involved, is going to hit some technical walls that are going to take some time to overcome. And one of the examples of that I'm seeing, is that we're designing locations that are 250 megawatts, 400 megawatts, but there's only 150 to 200 megawatts worth of power available in the area. And it would take years for the engineering studies to be completed, to Carolyn's point, because bringing that much power to one location is going to make the grid in that area turn into radiant heat and light instead of providing power to people. And so they need to be careful in moving that kind of power. So we're actually involved in probably half the designs we're doing in alternate energy sources. So that the standard process for us now is to say, what can we get from the power companies? And we go through a lot of hoops to establish that over a period of time and its cost. And then we look for gas to bring in gas turbines and precip systems. And we look for microgrid battery to bring in. And on par, we're probably, particularly in the US, providing 25, 35% of the power for a site in the first couple of years on alternate energy supply, known as behind the meter, so that it's only going to be used for that site. It's not going to be resold, although in many instances it can be dumped back into the grid. Not an easy task to get done in terms of the regulation required in that space. But, my mother used to say, good things happen only when you do your homework. And so you can't do these things any longer with the assumption that I can plug this thing in and I can physically build it. There is an enormous amount of engineering work which needs to be done to get to that point. And that's one of the pieces of the bubble that I'm worried about. Poor engineering, not having been done, particularly well over a period of time. And the assumption that an amount of power can be attained over a period of time via contract. And that's not true any longer. It's, it's show me the money kind of thing.
There's no option on capacity.
There's no option on capacity is what you just said. Would you unpack that a bit before we turn to Brent?
Electrons can't be stored. I mean, they can in batteries, but they can't be stored in a warehouse where you just choose to pull them when you want them, which is how we think about a lot of commodities in the infrastructure space. can't line up your supply chain and then just deploy it when you've gotten to scale. And in this country and in most of Europe, and actually I'm struggling to think of few places in Asia you can, it's you pay for it and you use it, and if you don't use it, someone else uses it, right? And so there is an obligation to serve in this country, and that's regulation, that's law. There's a reason for that. And so one of the bigger problems we had at Google was I would get yelled at because we ran out of energy. And I was like, no, we had that. Y'all didn't build your data center fast enough. And so they gave the energy to somebody else, right? So, and that's what happens. And so the on-site solutions are really critical. I think, at 300, 400, even 500 megawatt scale, that makes total sense. And in fact, depending on what transformer you have, you can figure out a technical solution. When you get to the 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 gigawatt scale, that you are building a city. You're building an entire new utility load. I'll put it in perspective. A good friend of mine, he's CEO of Comment in Chicago. He has a 5 gigawatt system total. He's got 12 gigawatts of capacity in the queue waiting.
So I turned to my friend Brent the other day on a project that's over $1 billion. All the pro formas have been done. Our client is looking to raise some money, and I bring him over to Brent. And I said, Brent, when can we get $1 billion together? And he said, what do you mean? Well, we sent you the material. When can we get $1 billion together? He said, Jamie, your client's got no power. I said, well, he's got a commitment for the power. He's got no power in writing. I said, well, what do you need that for? So he taught me that until there's a commitment of power in writing, he doesn't want to have a conversation with me, even though we represent Newmark. Why don't we talk about that? And can you talk about some of the data centers that you're working on? And can you plug in some words about nuclear?
Yeah, so just touching back on, is this a bubble? I think from our position, there's the public market perception, which there's some fragility in it. There's, any announcement, DeepSeek, Microsoft slowdown has a ripple through the public markets because there's investors that don't necessarily see the day-to-day and all these opportunities. And so you'll see more of an impact. On the private side, those announcements didn't derail a single deal we were working on. They had little to no impact. On the private side, it also is the majority of the deals that are in market are not getting done. So there's a lot of really large announcements, a lot of really large dollars. Most of those are the scale that a project could get to, and everybody gains value in putting out, it's $100 billion, there's a $15 billion data center, but it's going to take 10 years to build, or it may not ever be deployed. It always looks better to make that larger announcement of what could be and what the JV is intended on establishing. So it makes a perception around a bubble that may not be as the reality. I think we have a ton of it. Getting a deal done is very challenging in these environments. Getting any of these deals done without certainty is very challenging. To your question, Jamie, what we work on, what we don't. From the land side, which is the evolution of how we get to all the capital raising, we've probably seen 4,000 to 5,000 land sites in the past 2 years. We've probably worked on, actually spent time on 10% of those most, and then we've actually marketed probably, within the less than 50 of those that we viewed as actionable in that sites, and we believe that we could actually move forward with a tenant, with a buyer, with a developer. So it's very challenging. When they get announced, it obviously looks great, but it's very challenging to move those forward. I think from a power perspective, we are seeing the evolution of power. There was, until 6 months ago, we were told no behind the meter deal will ever happen. We still spent a lot of time on those. We were introducing on one of those. We've seen what Fermi's IPO that happened recently at a roughly $18 billion valuation. That'll be probably the largest private grid built in the U.S.
Would you unpack that project, please?
So that is natural gas.
Where is it? How large is it?
Yeah, Amarillo, Texas. Initially 2 gigawatts, will expand to 11 gigawatts, potentially larger. There is, your question about nuclear. There's a nuclear component to that. They've gone through the combined operating license approval process, or in that process. Others are doing something similar. We think, the evolution of nuclear is the next stage and will take longer to get there. But the reliance on the grid, I think we've realized or the markets realize, there's too much constraint and too much pressure on timelines to simply rely on the grid at this point. Behind the meter transactions are now moving forward rapidly, not just that one, but others that we've seen with tenants. And so we think that evolution continues at this point, and there will be a pathway to nuclear, but I think there's a lot that depends on the administration and how much they want to push that angle to see how quickly that all unfolds.
So, Kevin, can you talk about nuclear, or do we turn to Caroline to talk about nuclear? Is it real? Is it close?
So I remember a couple of years ago, I had a client who has a site up in New England said to us, hey, we just took an option on a piece of land that had an old Yankee Atomic nuclear site on it. Back in the good old days of building small, dirty, reactors, the Yankee Atomic Consortium built several of them all around. And they wanted to know, could we possibly use this? And I said, don't talk to me, talk to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It's not a decision we'll make. The point being, they got an immediate positive reaction saying, yes, it's been partially decommissioned, but it could be modified as long as it's being used at extremely low power, which by comparison, a data center would use based on the normal output of one of these. And so whether or not it proceeded, it's under NDA, so I can't, but it was a logical project to occur. The so-called small nukes that are being designed now, I like to sort of the George Jetson kind of approach to a nuclear reactor that you can roll in and put in. Those are actually gaining traction. I do not know if there's any deployed in the U.S., but I can tell you there are. Okay, she always knows stuff. But we are working on 2 in Europe, 1 in the Middle East, and 1 in Asia that are being done. And these are really small, but they produce significant amount of power. And because they're small, you get past a lot of the regulatory issues in terms of their danger if they're handled correctly, the disposal of the material. And I believe that is going to be a component in solving this problem. You can't have a single source any longer. You're going to have to exploit multiple technologies appropriately, I might add, over a period of time in order to make this all work. And therein lies the question about the bubble. It's not a single bubble here. There are breaks on this bubble potentially in many areas, power being one of them, meaning slow the process down before development of the technologies that are feeding AI. Those are going to continue to do this sine wave over a period of time, and the brakes will come back and the brakes will come off in terms of slowing it. So I view the bubble as a long-term event where it accelerates and the market wants to put money into it. We develop some capability, things don't work out, it comes back a little bit, a small amount of disillusionment, and then it moves forward again. There is no doubt that this thing is going to happen. The advent of large-scale AI facilities globally has too much power behind it. Bad pun. Too much force behind it. It's going to happen one way or another. We're just trying to figure out the financing, the engineering pieces, being able to do them in a judicious manner. But in 10 years or less, we won't even talk about it in terms of it being this new thing.
So let me ask Caroline, is there public information with regard to nuclear that you're allowed to talk about?
I mean, sure. Yeah, there's tons of public information around nuclear. I want to add one more comment to the bubble conversation, which is that the hyperscaler run is about creating a product to integrate into cloud, right? And if you actually look at the cloud market, even at the most concentrated cloud markets, there's only 50% capture rate in terms of overall sales, right, opportunity. So until we're at much higher penetrations of the cloud market, I think it's going to be difficult for us to navigate whether the bell and whistle that is supposed to accelerate the cloud market is a bubble or not, right? It's really dependent on how cloud growth continues and how these different companies market themselves. I mean, I if you look at the way Amazon went to market, why Amazon went to market stronger, faster, and was more successful was because it had more bells and whistles in their cloud offering, right? Google went to market as being a lower cost cloud provider. They sort of came in under the heels of that. Where they all end up with their AI offering is going to reshape cloud acquisition. But as long as cloud acquisition is still at 50% penetration anywhere, there's a lot of room to play, right? And so they're going to continue to be playing at this for quite some time. So I think that's probably a good way to look at it. In terms of nuclear, there's tons of stuff. A couple companies, SMRs that come to mind that are doing really great work. Kairos is an amazing company that I had the privilege to work with at Google. They have, when they finish and have up and running their first SMR, they will have built it 30 times in 30-time test facilities. It's fully in-house. They have control over all modularity, all supply chains. They've done it very differently. So Kairos has been a company that it's not making huge news all the time, but these things are coming out and they're in pilot stage right now, but they're absolutely happening. The reality is China's building nuclear plants every day. The Middle East is starting to build nuclear plants. It's where, and we can talk about this, it's who's funding it. So the nuclear companies that I've seen that have been successful are completely funded either by the state, and by state I mean federal government, by the state, or they are funded by someone who just has a lot of money and wants to see this happen, right? What we haven't figured out on nuclear yet is how to bring together multiple forms of capital: private equity, customer capital, public capital, and different forms of debt, imposed overrun, and insurance, right? That's where the real conundrum is in nuclear, and we don't have a blueprint for it yet, because everywhere else, and correct me if I'm wrong, but everywhere else it's largely underwritten, either by a sovereign wealth fund, or if you're in China, you're just building, right?
So let's change the subject a little bit. Let's talk about AI a little bit. While we do that, I'm going to digress for a moment. When I got up this morning and I knew what was going to be happening, I just put a smile on my face, because I knew that I was going to be spending time with you, and it was going to be a rich time. It was going to be a time where people were going to be interested in our guests and what guests were saying to us. We have in the audience today, we have in the room with us today, the leading architectural firm in the world that's driven by AI. What does that mean? Well, this young company that started in 2017 was just doing their job of generating AI technology and software, and they were doing okay, but they decided they needed to put an architectural firm on top of it, because the founders were architects, in order to really make this engine grow. And my story is about 30 or 40% incorrect, but I think it's substantially correct enough to continue on. But what is true is that we got a knock on the door one day, and some private equity folks knocked on the door and said, "We'd like to invest in your company. We'd like to put over $30 million in your practically new startup architectural firm that has an AI component to it." So about 2 weeks ago, we invited the lead partner and the head of BD to join us on the Pacific Palisades, because we're working on the rebuild of the Pacific Palisades for a client. And we spent the day with the founding partner, the co-founding partner of that firm, and the head of BD. And we learned a couple of things. But what we learned was that it would take, by the way, this particular client wants us to rebuild on 200 sites. That's about $1 billion worth of building. And John Conkle, who heads our LA office, is here, so he heard part of the conversation. But we knew that it would take about 4 or 5 months for this architectural firm to do the designs on each house. Every house was going to be different. And they said, no, with AI, we can do it in 30 days. And we didn't think, our client and I didn't think we heard them right. No. From start to finish, what's going to take to put out a set of drawings that can go to construction? And they said about 30 days. So what's the impact of AI on what you're designing and what you're talking to all the regulators and the power companies to, and the folks that are looking to you for money. What's AI doing to that conversation? Any one of you? Kevin, let's start with you.
So it's fundamentally driving a lot of what I'm doing. It's not AI in the traditional sense of cloud providers, as you brought up. It's completely new forms of the application of AI to all the things that we could think of. One of the analogies I like to make is it's the steam engine, the 1700s and 1800s. Think of how many places it showed up in and fundamentally changed manufacturing, life, every process that you could add to it. AI is essentially the steam engine occurring now that could be applied in so many different areas. And it's new, meaning it's not on the backs of old applications. It's not on the back of existing cloud providers and hyperscalers, though they're obviously participating in it. I have a project now, clean from the start, 5 gigawatt total over 5 years. We're designing. It's being built now even as I speak, being funded by a sovereign fund, simply because this country has decided that this is their next step for their economy. This is totally new for them. And I'm getting that repeated all over in Europe. I've got teams freezing their off up in the fjords in Norway simply because we can blow a hole in the side of a mountain, drop a data center in, get all the free air cooling we need, and have a tremendous view coming out the front door of the water. And the Northern Lights, when necessary, completely new application development and supporting of things never thought of before. And so I look at this as another entire economy that's being developed, and that's what's going to cause this, growth in AI, not necessarily as a replacement for all the things we're doing now, enterprise compute and all the co-location providers, and that's all still going to be there. This is the next several chapters in the book of humanity, and that juggernaut's not going to stop because that application, the architecture, God, I hope it doesn't come to engineering, it's just too important to ignore. And if you don't have the back end engines to get it done, it ain't going to happen. And so there's a necessity pushing this and a separate economy. It's just not the economy of making money in building the AI infrastructures, but it's the economy that is the result of that AI infrastructure providing in other areas. So there's a 2x or 3x lever here in terms of what it's going to do. And I hope I have enough to talk about this with you runway to be able to see this in the next 20, 30, 40 years, perhaps, to see what that impact is, because it's your point about, the change in, macroeconomics in the world. It's just going to flip economies of nations completely around. We're watching this happen now.
Dr. Golin, what's your comment with regard to AI?
So I'll be honest, if AI wasn't creating so much energy demand, I think that the industry as a whole might be the last one to adopt technological evolution. It's an incredibly antiquated industry. There is a beautiful billboard somewhere in New York. Last time I was up here, I saw it, and it was talking about compliance. And the billboard was 2 vertical billboards next to each other, and it said, compliance doesn't need to be screenshot after screenshot after screenshot after screenshot. And then the next billboard, screenshot after screenshot after screenshot. And that's actually a lot of how the electricity industry has been run. It's incredibly archaic, and most utilities in this country and most RTOs were running on software that was made in the 90s because they are not incentivized in any way to invest in this. However, here comes along this volatile, massive amount of need on the grid, and you can't build a power plant fast enough to service that need. You can't build transmission fast enough. So you're going to have to figure out a way to find megawatt hours on the system to service that. And if you do it right, that's going to mean you have to invest in your transmission and distribution system, invest in flexibility, invest in interoperability, invest in demand response, storage, energy efficiency. And to do that, you need a lot of data and you need improved analytics. And so where I see this interesting, can we call that a circular economy? That's not the correct, yeah, let's say, is that this energy demand is actually bringing our system to its brink of operational capacity, intellectual operational capacity. And it's forcing us to sort of rewrite the way we think about the delivery of power. And the only way to really do that is with a massive modernization in data analytics. And that's where AI comes in. So there are a few utilities. And if you look at what's going on in the UK right now, it's an amazing example of how they fundamentally changed their regulatory model. And now AI is being deployed at scale in terms of optimizing for their grid. And you have companies like Octopus who can, like that, turn around 2 gigawatts of flexible load across a tiny island nation, from cars and batteries, to home thermostats, heat pumps. They couldn't do that without AI software and applications, right? So it's this very interesting dance that's going on. I will say, though, that you don't have the workforce for it, right? So in the energy space, a lot of these people, they are lovely people, but they have never been incentivized to be the most innovative, cutting edge, entrepreneurial folks, the people who operate our grids. In fact, they're disincentivized. Why? Because you just want the grid to work. You want to be really reliable, and you don't want to do things that are risky, right? But now they have to. And the interesting sort of breakneck here is the workforce, and the ability for the workforce to integrate these tools and understand them and utilize them. And I see that is the tension. I don't see a lot of utility CEOs or RTO leaders that are saying, we don't know how to do this, or we're going to stick to our guns and we're going to do it the way we've done it. We don't care. Like, we're doing it our way or the highway. I see a lot of them saying, we don't know what to do, and frankly, we don't have anyone in our workforce who knows how to do this. And that's where this breakdown is not being talked about, but it's really happening.
Do we have enough electrons in the system now, if they were harvested differently, to be able to meet this demand? And I know you raised your hand, so I'm going to let Caroline take a break for a second and go to you, but then I'm going to turn to Brent. And then after we're done with Brent, we're going to talk to you and ask you what kind of questions you'd like to pose to our guests. But what's your concept about, are there enough electrons to do it?
Back in school, I had to raise my hand.
That's all right. That's okay.
So about a year ago, we were introduced to 2 companies that wanted us to help them prove this technology. And what it was is a replacement for large-scale, long-distance, high-voltage cable. There's no other way to put it. Zero line loss. They use nitrogen jacketing to cool it down to a particularly very, very low level, and recharge stations all along the way. And we looked at it and said, this is brilliant engineering, but you're never going to get a power company to be interested in doing this. And about 8 weeks ago, I got the, no, you were wrong. And we're talking about 2 power companies who are going to do the pilots of this. Why? Because even though it is difficult and expensive and problematic, it captures the electrons that are already on the line that are being wasted right now, and is cheaper than building power plants long term. And so, our heads exploded because we instantly saw what the issues are: regulatory issues, craft issues, how to hang this stuff, insurance issues. I lined it all up in my head and I went, there's enough force behind this that it hopefully will get bulldozed. So there are certain key technologies which are on the horizon now, which I truly believe are going to be stunning in terms of their impact, because I can't tell you, I don't know it to be true, borrowing your phrase, but I believe that there is a significant amount of power in the system now that these grid owners go, we can't capture it. It's just evaporating, and this will solve the problem.
So let's take that. I'm sorry. I didn't want to talk over you, Kevin. Let's talk for a minute to Caroline. I read your paper. And by the way, Thompson Hine deals in these questions all of the time in our real estate group, our construction group, our digital infrastructure group. So I continuously turn to our friends to try to stay current. Caroline, where are those electrons? How can I husband them? And how can I distribute them with the same grid structure that's there today? Can I do that?
I would say that 9 out of 10 projects can probably be powered without having to build any new capacity whatsoever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That doesn't mean we won't need to build new capacity, and I hope we build nuclear. But I would say that the vast majority of what I'm seeing can be serviced. I think there's probably 60 gigawatts of latent capacity in the U.S. system alone. Now, it matters geographically where those are, right? You see data centers go to where historical industrial manufacturing has been, right? That's why it's in Ohio. That's why it's in Pennsylvania. There's infrastructure there for it. But in most of those systems, I go back to what I said, they were overbuilt on the distribution side. Most of those systems, actually every system in this country, has never been incentivized towards making the leanest and most efficient delivery of power. That is not the business model of the electricity industry. It is a return on capital investment. And so here comes along this big force. And it says, hi, you don't have enough capital for our investment, because they don't. And so utilities across the country have to decide, what capital opportunity am I willing to forego in order to maintain load growth on my system long term, right? And how do I find electrons in the system in order to service what is, if we're going to call it a bubble, a wave, whatever, the next 5 years where things sort of figure themselves out. And so that is going to look like significant changes to the utility regulatory business model. It's also going to look like valuing megawatt hours over valuing megawatts. And that's really technical, but if you think about it this way, if a utility can find megawatt hours on their system, they can sell it for whatever they need to sell it, and the hyperscalers will pay for it. That's the great part about this whole cluster, that you have this really willing partner that is, willing to pay above premium. We've never had that in this space, so it's the leverage point we've never had. So you have to think about it in the way of saying, is the problem that we don't have enough power plants? No, I think the problem is that we don't know how to move power correctly in this industry. And so how do you take electrons off the distribution system at peak? How do you create mass flexibility programs, energy efficiency programs? How do you deploy dynamic line rating, which is kind of what you're talking about, grid enhancing technologies? How do you deploy storage and earn a return on storage, not just as a generation asset? These are all things that are like brand new. It's like brand new. And there are a few utilities that are doing it, like Maria Pope, PG&E of Portland. Like, she is trying her damnedest to do all of this and is kind of the front runner on it. And I've already mentioned the UK, but there are completely different business models that are going to have to be developed and utilized. The problem is, and I'll be honest, and I'll stop talking, the vast majority of the hype around this space is not pressuring that solution. The vast majority of the hype around the hyperscalers is pressuring, will they meet their sustainability goals? Will they invest in enough new renewable energy to offset whatever they're going to use in gigawatts on the grid? And they weren't developed. We weren't developed to be this prosumer active investor. We were a team of, my entire team at Google is 200 people. That's it. 200 people for the entire globe trying to figure out how to power the largest digital infrastructure on the planet. That's it. Because our responsibility was to offset, was to purchase renewables and clean energy. It was not to figure out how to completely repurpose the grid so that we could get on fast enough. So you have an incentive problem across all areas, across utilities, across regulators, and really, what is the job of the hyperscaler? I don't really know that it's our job to fix the grid. we're happy to pay for it.
That's a great presentation. Great answer to the question. Brent, what's AI doing to you at Newmark?
Well, I think it's all the efficiencies that are being talked about, and I think we're seeing all the same problems. I would say, all the solutions that are being developed are great, but the timeline to implement them just doesn't work, which is why you're going to see new generation building. To unlock all of that power, to get utilities to move, to be incentivized to do that, it's not going to happen fast. Not because we don't need more efficiencies in our life, we don't need ChatGPT to work better, but because we're now on the edge of a massive national security issue. This is like, AI is great for day-to-day life, but the reality is, as was mentioned, China's building 22 nuclear reactors right now. Those are going to be used to power AI. It's a national defense issue that we're running into. The government's going to have to step in and allow for more generation to be built faster, or for generation to be made available faster, or we're going to have trouble keeping our position as a global superpower. I think the idea is every global superpower has nuclear-powered warships, nuclear-powered submarines, and they're going to have nuclear-powered AI if they're going to continue to be a global leader. And so I think from our perspective, that world is coming. I think the bridge to get there is going to be a lot of new forms of generation in terms of, or utilizing more natural gas, using less of the, the clean energies or the offsets that we've talked about historically, and really powering AI to support our national defense requirements.
So let's turn to our guests and see if there are any questions before we turn to my partner, Tom Coyne, who is doing some really interesting work putting data centers into old steel plants for production. But are there questions that you might have that you'd like to ask our guests? Yes. Could you identify yourself?
Sure. I'm Emily Kunkel with Orton Tomasetti on the engineering side as well. Thank you. I have a booming voice, but this works better. So I do come from the power side initially before transitioning into the built environment. So I get the nuance between the two different industries, and there's a lot of butting of heads. But hearing kind of from Brent about financing needs the power contract in place, and power contracts are built around guaranteed peak load. And most data centers don't want to necessarily settle for less than what they want for like peak IT load, right? So you kind of get this like shift where deals are falling through because they can't get the North Star that they want. And we're talking about unlocking all this load on the grid that's technically available, but nobody's really taking advantage of it. And I'm wondering what your perspective is of the fact of we're letting the data centers dictate what they want their load to be and making the power meet that. And power isn't necessarily great at ramping with that. Can we ever get to a world where the data centers are then just following what's available on the load, like unlock all of that random load that's in the grid and let the data centers fluctuate with that? Is that something that's financeable? Is that even technically possible? How can we be more harmonic with each other?
So I think it's a both and answer, actually. And there isn't a single data center company today that isn't preparing to be flexible in some form, capacity. But it's a matter of technical ability, and it's a matter of overall opportunity cost. When it costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars for every minute that you're training your chips, there is not a demand signal in the market that is good enough to get you to pull down. If you are being told if you pull down for 10, 20, 30 hours a year, you can get online quicker, that's something that works within, the overall business model. It's when you're asking a 2-3 gigawatt data center to be flexible daily to respond to peak demand, which, by the way, precedence in this country has always allowed industrial players to opt out of any flexibility, right? To be flexible to meet peak demand. That becomes a real technical problem. That actually becomes a power dynamics problem, and whether you want the gigawatt of fluctuating load at the end of a breaker. You're chuckling, but it's true. So I think the better solution to that is actually building storage on site, and then creating new contracts where that storage can be utilized not just as a backup source so that the data center can be flexible, but also the utility can utilize it for ancillary, for firming and a lot. But the contract structures don't exist. So we have a paper problem more than we have an electron problem, right? And but the other thing I would say is that there are these enterprise data centers that constitute about 10% of the market that are building storage in, right? So Varus is one that comes to mind. They're building storage in from the get-go so that they can go and do exactly what you said, which is that we are going to make our load profile be the inverse of your peak profile. So we're actually load stabilizer to the grid. And one of my biggest regrets at Google is that I tried to go figure out the new contract structures that would allow us to do all these things. And I didn't work hard enough to just tell the engineering team from the get-go, hey, AI has a really erratic load shape anyways. Let's buy up all the storage we possibly can right now.
Thank you.
Is there another question? Another question from anyone here? Let me give you a mic. What's your name?
I'm Wes Kuntz. Push the button. I'm Wes Kuntz. Hello? Okay. My name is Wes Kuntz, and I'm with a company called Fort Hook Capital Partners. We're real estate advisors. We've talked with Brent before, and we have some clients that are evaluating repurposing property for data center development. And one of the issues that you've talked about that we're butting up against is the power from the grid and sort of the power contracts. And one of the questions that I have in all of your experiences, if you're butting up against that, and in the backdrop of what you've said with some of the issues the power companies actually have of having people that can figure out the equation or figure out how to get the power to these sites that have transmission lines that work and substations that are already in place, have you seen has there been political influence that actually does move the ball on occasion, or is that sort of just pie in the sky and folks trying to say, hey, we can help you?
I need like 10 seconds to think. I think that the first intuition for many of the utilities in this country, which I don't blame them for, was to say, these companies are richer than God, make them pay for it. And politically, they had the backing to do that, right? I think that is not going to be a sustainable solution because I think they'll actually miss out on what they could do with an improved business model. And so I think the historical approach politically has been, no, just make them pay for it, right? And you can understand why. Where I see the transition happening now is a general recognition that, and this could be because of the administration we're in, right, that the regulation is inept for the technological need that we see coming at us. And so I think in January, you will probably see a lot of state bills that will try to get at this issue. And it will be polarizing. But I think if we are thoughtful about regulatory reform, it's going to make everything better for the long run. So I would say not yet, but I think that is coming soon in terms of getting some of this unlocked, where historically it was really just capital extraction from the big tech companies. Yeah.
I just, as a practical, on the small scale for influence, if the impact of the data center is great enough so that the municipality, whatever entity, believes that it's important for their economics, for the tax base, and for training. The easiest thing, and we do this, we ask for that help all the time, is all of the legal work necessary to be able to enable things such as rights of way, permitting, state and local EPA. They can influence those in a positive manner by saying, listen, we will expedite these things because for the good of the community. Most states that have a public utilities commissioner will listen to municipalities when they say this is a particularly important project for us to get done. What help can you give us in terms of helping the power authority be able to do the things that they need to do. And in many instances, those things like railroad right-of-ways, state, federal highways, those kinds of things. So there's some practical stuff which always occurs in getting that done. But I'm always amazed at how few times that folks who want to do the development on data centers really go after that. What they're interested in sometimes is getting the tax abatements, which is all well and good, but that, I love your term, de-incentify, the municipality for going ahead because they're giving up a lot of money to get it done. And there's always going to be some grumbling from a PR standpoint within a given community, whether or not that's a good thing. In many instances, if you do the you do the P&L out a couple of years, it may be better to take the tax hit and get online faster and start the revenue flow than be so consumed by tax breaks.
And I think what you'll see coming out is pork. I mean, to be blunt, and they should. I mean, we should, right? And the companies that are able to prepackage that when they go to market and say, we're coming with this low income energy program to make sure no one's rates go up. We're coming with this investment in workforce for the schools and the technical colleges. And we're coming with this investment in the Little League or whatever it is. I can't understand, I know you know this really well, but these big tech companies and even these newer data center, third parties, they haven't been in the infrastructure game that long. So the go-to-market strategy of really, truly embedding with the community, because that's your political safe haven, is something they are learning by fire. And you see it playing out. But they are learning. And I think that this next wave of investment, the 2026 wave of investment, is not going to come with the big shock and awe of Meta raised everyone's rates by 20%. It's going to come with all this other pork that I think will be really good.
Brent, before we go on to the next question, do you have a comment in this space?
No, I think it's everything that was mentioned. Like the incentives are massive to every one of these deals. They end up being, the linchpin on getting a lot of them done. And there's a lot of asks from the community at the end, which they are in, they have the leverage that they never had before to make those asks. So whether it's the Little League or the school or whatever it is like that becomes the key point to getting these deals across the goal line.
Thank you. Another question. Yes, sir. The young man in the back just raised his hand. Let me see if I can get a mic to you.
That's okay.
Way back
Jake
here.
Bronstein.
Hold it. Identify yourself, please.
Jake Bronstein from Industrial Equity Partners. Question in terms of pathway to power on a national basis. What are you guys looking at in terms of average pathway to power for a critical load over 100 megawatts right now in the queue? You guys have alluded to specifically the Chicago market. There's 5 megawatts of generation capacity. There's 12 gigawatts in the queue. How long are they going to wait for it? Well, and the other, part of this equation is if we're thinking about the queue, right, there's 325 gigawatts nationally, give or take, right? So that's 280 million, 300 million homes, constant power. What percentage of that power demand is actually converted into projects? What are we actually going to look like? Like everyone's coming out with these announcements. What's the percent conversion to realized projects?
So in terms of your first question in projects that, the 100 megawatt, what's the timeline? It depends regionally. It depends on location, what's available, whether it's through the grid or behind the meter. I would say there are very few projects at this point from what we've seen that are going to deliver 100 megawatts within really the 2027 timeframe. It's probably beyond that at this point. There are a few. There's some that can still hit 26. Again, it's what all the hyperscalers are asking for. It's what they want. It's very hard to deliver. 27, there's a couple projects that will still phase into that. There's a lot of projects that will deliver in that timeframe that have been in process for years now. But on a go-forward basis, signing a new project at this point and having that type of power within 2027 is pretty limited.
I agree with that timeline. You can't get a turbine before 2031, really. Right now, a brand new one. So if you're brand new, putting 100 megawatts in the queue somewhere, 6 to 7 years. Especially if you're not coming with any special innovative contract structure that allows you to invest in something that extracts or finds these megawatt hours on the system, which most of these companies don't know how to do. I mean, to be honest, most of the electricity industry doesn't know how to do it. So it's not surprising that the data center companies don't know how to do it. You know, I will say that my hope is that that door shuts, is shut for a different reason as well. I mean, I think what you see happening from a regulatory perspective is some really high collateral requirements, parent guarantees being required in order to even start an ESA negotiation or get in the queue. That has the benefits of really whittling the market down to those that have a true offtake, or towards, you know, it favors the hyperscalers, which is what you see happening, because I think the utilities know that they can ask for the port from the hyperscalers and they'll pay for it, right? So it's sort of a perverse incentive in that way. But at the same time, here's what I think will also happen is that the entire powered land division of the market has a very short runway, because I think utilities very quickly are going to figure out, and some of them already are, developer companies are going to figure out how to have their own powered land department. And once they do, you're going to see a big swath of the market lose its place at the table. Yeah.
Tom Coyne, you're looking for a question, I think.
Yeah, it's just working.
You have to
Testing. Okay. Yeah, Brent, as you know, there are a multitude of real estate developers out there who either own land or who are acquiring land with the hope to develop it for data center use. And you mentioned you look at thousands of opportunities. You select a few among those. Can you describe the profile of the most suitable site for data center?
Yeah, I think we look at a lot of characteristics of it. It's obviously power first that we're evaluating timelines to power, what we think is marketable, developable land, zoning in place, water availability, and that can depend on, again, regionally, how many million gallons a day they're going to require. Fiber is obviously very important, and changing in terms of its importance. That, you know, the data centers used to go where the fiber was and the power would be available. Now it's the opposite. You're going to the power, and it's much easier to bring fiber to the opportunity. But you know, all those are characteristics that we're looking at. Then you can still run into other challenges, whether it's NIMBYism or some of the local challenges of the schools, the municipalities not wanting data center. And then I think, you know, we're trying to work with the utilities to evaluate exactly what we're talking about here. You know, we've gone through processes 9-12 months with groups, had buyers, had tenants, to have the utility ask for, you know, a $2 billion letter of credit. And so then at that point, the project's dead. I think everyone's kind of learning on the fly how these are going to go. The utilities are taking steps to weed out a lot of the land flippers, and to focus on groups that are actually going to have offtake long term and fulfill the financial requirements that they're going to go build and secure for the next 20, 30 years. So those are the characteristics we generally focus on, and it's very hard to check the box on all of those things.
It's not so much what they also have as what they don't have. So there's a process you go through for assessing a chunk of land, and you also don't want to get caught down the road, even if you have fiber, water, and some level of power over a period of time. And I often say, if you need 100 megawatts, really it's in 5 years, what do you need to start with? And put it in layers. So if you can get 20, 30, 40 megawatts to start with, sort of matches your capital cash flow, start building on that, sign the contract so it rolls out. So you have it, you can absorb it, but you also want to do natural and man-made, risk assessments. You've got to do hydrology. There's a whole series of things you need to do to make sure the land is okay. And then the PR issue, depending upon the zoning and proximity to other zones, normal housing around it. And then if the data center is going to be an AI data center that's going to have has the potential for a large heat footprint and dissipation, you have to deal with that. States are now catching on to the fact that you can create a microclimate with these things, and you need to understand and talk about how you're going to deflect heat and sound over a period of time. And then smaller issues like traffic management. I can't tell you how many projects get sidelined for a period of time because particularly the traffic management for the construction phase is not an easily solvable thing, and it draws the construction phase out. So there's some upfront assessment work that is in addition to the obvious logical ones.
And I'd add workforce. which is what we don't talk about enough. But workforce
Could
is
you comment on workforce?
I think we don't have we like to have these big conversations about energy, but we never have an EPC in the room. You know, like we don't have the workforce to build this scale of energy and data centers in this country that there is capital to fund. Period. So whoever shores up workforce, and good luck with that, they're going to have a competitive advantage.
Some other questions of our guests? Some other questions? Yes, sir. Tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Neil Stahl from JP Morgan. You each alluded to the issue of water, and probably the only thing that's more antiquated than the distribution system is water rights in this country. Could you speak to that issue where it's great if you can drop a data center into a fjord in Norway, but there are no fjords in Virginia or Ohio or Texas. So could you speak to the issue of the demand for water?
Sure. I have a project right now in Maryland. It's basically an agricultural plot, and water has become a huge issue, and it could conceivably stop the project from going on. The municipalities are stressed for water. They're perfectly willing to provide water through the normal process for life safety, but they can't provide, as Brett said, the potential for millions of gallons worth of water, either for an initial fill of the cold water loop, I won't go too nerdy on you, or for greater if you're not even going to use something that sophisticated over a period of time. So your options are sink wells. So you have to bring hydrologists out and geologists to understand what you can get, and then go through the permitting process for determining whether or not you can sink those wells and whether or not you're going to have an effect on the local aquifers and the abutters. And there's some pretty bad pistol fights going on over stuff like that right now for obvious reasons. Or you truck it in. And if you truck it in and it's a cold loop and you're going to do the initial fill, that's okay. You just got to plug that cost into your P&L up front. And the reality is we have a lot of clients who are doing that. And what I said earlier is the technical solutions always have to be put into the context of what the costs are long-term and the profitability of that project, and what the OpEx and CapEx requirements are going to be over a number of years, 5 to 10 years, some useful life cycle in the development. And so don't think of that, oh my God, they're going to truck it in. If that's the solution, that's the bloody solution. There are other technical ways to get it done, but it is now becoming both a PR nightmare and a technical nightmare if it's not readily available. Even if you get to large municipalities who, if they have 3 or 4 of these things happen, my hometown, Boston, we have pipes that were put in when Paul Revere rode, okay? And so while the water may be there, just like power, good luck getting it through the aqueducts out to a particular area. And so there's this whole engineering process you've got to go now for water that you never had to do before.
What about air cooling, though?
Say again?
Air cooling.
Yeah, well,
what are you saying on that?
It depends upon the kind that you're using. So if you use the traditional sort of adiabatic air cooling, you're spraying those coolers on the roof with thousands and thousands of gallons an hour worth of water to pull the heat particulate matter out of it. And that could be the greatest user of water. If you, the best is using water to cool right into the computer chip. Very common now, particularly in AI. It's the only way to get it done. There are some other, intermediate, glycol and other technologies that can be used. But when you begin to get into AI level data centers, you begin to eliminate a lot of those options. You end up just with a water cooled option to get it done, in some level of reality. But that's why, again, I tell my equity partners, the first thing you need to do in evaluating that project is to do a sort of a candid design of what it is you're going to build, and then understand the implications to the things that you have to do to develop the project. Usually it's done in reverse. We fund it, we're going to build the data center, then we do a design and realize we hit a corner.
And what I always saw was that air cooling increased energy use by 20 to 30%.
Oh, Lord, yes.
Yeah.
If you ever look at the top of a data center now, traditionally, see these large half-dome scoops making enormous amounts of noise, moving air through, and they're just chillers. They're blowing a lot of air over a water membrane to cool it down, just like the old swamp coolers used to do pre-air conditioning days. And it's very effective and relatively cheap to initialize, but it's very expensive to run and operate because of the, right, and not the least of which is Legionnaires that shows up every now and then, but we won't get into that.
So to start to wind down, you all can join us with some refreshments after this spirited conversation. There may be one or more questions, and I think we have time for a couple more. But if we don't, our guests will be available to you. I want to thank, before I go to the last few questions you might have, the people at Thompson Hine that put all this together. Tom Cohen, that team did a great job, didn't they? And we want to appreciate that very much. And Scott, our videographer, who's been taking videos, all of this will be available to your friends that would like to hear what you heard. As I hope and we hope you enjoyed it. It'll be on our website. The information about our guests are on the invite that you received on the web. So to the extent that you'd like to speak to them, you know where they are by whatever information they allowed us to put in that invite. But I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate you all participating. You said yes very easily. We had time to prepare. I knew this was going to be more than exciting. I think that I'd like just to go around the room and ask 3 people in random what they thought about today's presentation. I'd like to do that from the non-Thompson Hine people because that would not be fair. So would any of our guests like to tell us what they felt about today's presentation? Is there someone that would like
to leave the room?
No, you got to take the good and the bad. Was it helpful to you? Would someone like to say a comment or two? Jacob, okay. Wes, thank you.
I would just say, as someone that's been, minorly involved in this industry over the last 2 years, this was incredibly informative. I think the folks that you brought here and the different disciplines, and to be able to talk from a different perspective on these topics is really incredible. So from my perspective, this was very fruitful.
Great, really appreciate that comment. Pete Heisen, do you have a comment on this that you'd like to share?
Sure do. Sure. I got a loud voice, but be louder, I guess. One, thank you for presenting. That was a great discussion. I learned something from each person up on that. I don't talk well on that, so I'll just talk without that.
Sure.
Learned a different piece of data centers from each one of you. I actually didn't realize we had that much floating power around, electrons just floating and not being used. That's pretty fascinating because I sit on.
You're paying for them.
Yeah. We are.
We're all paying for them, by the way.
And we were talking a little bit about nuclear right before this. Like, how do you bring it into the U.S.? How do you are there data centers actually utilizing it? So I find that pretty fascinating. I got a lot of friends that are engineers that work for GE, and they talk about that. Pretty fascinating, and overall, it was really eye-opening discussion. Really appreciate it. Thanks for putting it all together.
Thank you. And before I turn to our guests who spoke with us and ask them how rewarding this was or was not, Jacob, how was this for you?
Yeah, this is great. I live in this space, particularly more on the power gen and power plant side. Actually working with Brent on a deal right now that we're really excited about. So I think it's always good to hear, different perspectives, different disciplines, really understanding the risks to the market, where it's at, emerging technologies, and also the compliance piece of just what's coming down for regulated utilities and the pushback. And I do agree that probably the power plant play is far and few between. I think probably the future, it's all going to be around building power generation and infrastructure around that. And it's of course going to be the pathway to power, just being able to complement the technology cycles. So I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you.
So my next and final question are to our guests, and then we'll break and enjoy each other's company. Refreshments from Thompson Hine. Was this good for you? Did you feel that it was rewarding? Did you enjoy the questions? Did you enjoy the conversation? was it worth coming up from Atlanta, going down from Boston, and coming down a half block?
Half a block was fine. Anymore would have been a little much, but no, this was great. We appreciate all the questions, appreciate the opportunity to present. I think having the unique disciplines has been great, to be able to cover each aspect from kind of the start of the project all the way through the financing of it and execution of it. So appreciate you putting it all together. This was very good.
So Caroline, was it worth coming up from Atlanta?
Of course it was worth it. I mean, we're like in the most interesting thing that's happened in my lifetime, I think, right now. So I learn something new every day about it, and I learned a few new things today too.
Thank you. Yeah. Kevin, you've been speaking for a long time, like the other panelists. How did this work out for you?
Anytime we all have our experience on that side of the fence, and anytime we can share that with folks on your side of the fence to make you understand the issues that we're seeing, it makes our jobs easier. I've often said that, my best clients are the ones that are informed. They understand what they're getting into. They can do their homework. It's not, so this is a little bit of an evangelical kind of thing, being able to get the word out about what's going on out there. And I did appreciate the questions and the perspective.
What subject would you want to see at the next session? And I'll ask the same question and then we'll be done. If there were a next section, and there will be another session, what would you want to be talking about?
Well, whoa, some echo. I think we have to figure out how to make the capital work. There is enough capital. You didn't ask that question. Is there enough capital? Because I think we're all presuming there is enough capital. It is in different buckets, and we don't know how to get them into the same bucket effectively. So I think a really strong conversation around risk under different capital models and how you marry those up. That's the nut to solve. Like I said, we have a paper problem. Part of that paper problem is we are not transacting on the right type of contracts to get this stuff built because they haven't been developed yet.
Yeah, I think the capital aspect's very interesting in terms of how this is all going to be funded going forward. Obviously, there's been a lot of successful projects to date. There's also a lot of guarantees that have been made to make those projects happen. And it's great to finance it. It's great to see it being built now. There's a lot of questions about what the exit looks like and what happens with all these projects longer term. So I think that could be an interesting next topic.
So then let me share in closing our appreciation to our good friends at Thompson Hine, Dave Gilmore of DesignIntelligence, and invite you to visit them at di.net. You'll find it as a great resource. Tom, thank you very much for working to put this together as part of the head of the real estate practice of the firm. I think that we're going to have some really good critique of this. By and large, I enjoyed it, and I know you did too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then let's end this and enjoy some repast in our conference center. Right to your door there's some good food and some alcohol. Thank you very much.